Countries across the Asia-Pacific and Europe are exploring and developing the use of vaccine passports, or proof of inoculation against COVID-19. South Korea, for one, is planning to launch digital vaccine passports this month with a smartphone app that verifies the unlikelihood of a person either catching or carrying the disease across borders. The idea of vaccine passports were initially conceived as immunity passes to restore international travel. But a growing number of countries are moving towards domestic usage as a way of encouraging people to get the jab and reopening the economy. For some, this marks the beginning of a fast return to normalcy, while businesses and various establishments gain confidence to reopen without the fear of hosting community transmission. But what signifies freedom for some has also raised concern in others about possible discrimination and privacy breaches, especially in the United States. There are also various logistical and medical complications that need ironing out. So today we discuss the various benefits and concerns surrounding COVID-19 vaccine passports. And for this, I'm joined by Dr. Garry Jennings, Chief Medical Advisor of the Heart Foundation of Australia and board member of the Cardiac Society of Australia and New Zealand. We're also joined by Mark Hall, Professor of Law, Director of Health Law and Policy Programme at the Wake Forest Law School. Now, a very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today. And well, my first question goes to you, Dr. Jennings. Now, countries like South Korea, China, and those in the European Union, they've all been developing their own vaccine or immunity certificates. And international organisations like the International Air Transport Association, they've developed their own, as has the World Economic Forum. Now, even before the pandemic, as you may well remember, getting a visa for travel was enough of a headache. Would these multiple immunity passport systems cause even more complications?
Well, this is a global pandemic and all of the solutions need to be global. They need to have a local wrinkle to them, especially for domestic use. But I see no reason why anyone would object to having some sort of solid documentation of what vaccine someone has had and when, and you know, their likelihood of being immune to COVID particularly when they travel. So we'd like to see, I'd like to see an international convention on what the information should be in these documents. And we've had them for a long time, of course, with yellow fever and other conditions.
Right, so really allowing vaccinated passengers or those with immunity to travel a bit more freely, and also reassuring border control authorities as well that incoming passengers aren't infected or are carrying the disease. But Dr. Jennings, what are the possible health implications that could arise from vaccine passports, or questions that authorities need to consider as they roll out these programs? Being vaccinated, does that guarantee you're going to have a transmission-free travel? And how long would these immunity passports last?
These are very good questions, and this is not an open and shut case. We know that a vaccine passport wouldn't, or being vaccinated is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Not that all of the vaccines have the same efficacy in terms of preventing COVID. We don't know enough yet about how they benefit as far as transmission of COVID to other people. We don't know a lot about how long they will last, and we know that there are variants appearing all the time. So I think it's very important, as we've seen in some countries that have introduced this, that we don't give up all the other things we've been using so successfully to prevent COVID transmission. This just gives more confidence, and hopefully more confidence to the community that they can move around a bit more freely.
And Dr. Jennings, in some countries, certain vaccines have been approved for widespread usage, but in other countries, the same type of vaccines may not have been approved or gone through the same kind of regulatory procedures. Would this also perhaps be an issue in terms of issuing vaccine passports if you're going to a country and you've had the jab from company A, for instance, but then the country you're traveling to doesn't really recognize it or hasn't approved it yet? Would that possibly cause issues?
Yes. Whilst I said that there's no reason why we can't have an international program of documentation of vaccination, it's the way different countries that will use it that is going to introduce some complexity. And not only, as you say, do we have different vaccines registered in different countries, and they probably have different levels of protection. We've also got countries that probably can't afford universal vaccination, and we don't want them to be left behind as global growth resumes, as the pandemic ebbs and flows.
Right, so there's some ethical questions there as well. And now, Professor Hall, currently there seems to be more concern about the use of vaccine passports in domestic usage than internationally at the moment. I mean, we must remember that not everyone, for whatever reason, may get vaccinated. And some are worried that allowing vaccine passports or proof of vaccination, that's going to deny access to a growing number of places, services, and even job opportunities. There have also been privacy concerns. So for countries where vaccinations are slow or uneven, social inequality might worsen. How real is this fear?
Well, the issue is just getting public attention now in the U.S., and a lot of it is based on, I guess, scare tactics, if you will. Imagine a world in which you have the haves and the have-nots, and it's along traditional lines of social disadvantage. I think it's a topic that's complex enough and potentially divisive enough that we need to approach it somewhat slowly, and so that suggests avoiding a government mandate that you have to have a vaccine to do this, that, or the other. But the idea that we somehow should prohibit any private initiative to display your vaccine status or to institute at sort of individual level of individual businesses protections that make perfect sense is, I think, an infringement on freedom that would not be wise at this point, because we have, despite the doubts that Dr. Jennings spoke about, the vaccine is remarkably protective against the common variants, and people feel like they should have more freedoms when they're vaccinated, and holding them back against their will and is just not a natural response. And so we're trying to sort all that out right now.
Professor Hall, we've seen Israel adopt these green passes that enable members of the public to somewhat go back to their daily lives with proof of inoculation. And it seems that in European countries are moving to do the same. And some countries have the majority of the public, they do back these passports. For instance, in Britain, 6 in 10 people think that the benefits are going to outweigh the sort of concerns that may arise. But it seems that Americans are more concerned about vaccine passports than perhaps their European counterparts or people in other parts of the world. And it also seems a bit more politicized. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, it's interesting, Xiong. We did a survey of the American public last year to see what they thought about the idea before it had been brought to political attention, I guess. And we also saw sort of a 60-40 split. In fact, we used the same survey that's been used in England. Intrigued to see how things would break here. And 60-40 or 50-50 or whatever, that's a pretty even or deep split. That means people are divided. But what we saw was that they weren't divided along political or socioeconomic lines. Some people sort of saw the logic of, if you can show immunity, you should have more freedoms. Other people felt like that might interfere with social solidarity and everybody staying kind of on board with trying to get the virus tamped down. So I think those are two very sensible reactions, but so far, until recently, they haven't been divided into political camps. But what we've seen here just over the last week is some political leaders opposed to the Biden administration saying that sort of putting out kind of as a scare tactic that somehow that administration is going to force us to all be labeled in this way to make it a more divisive political issue. I think to serve sort of partisan political ends. And I don't think that's a healthy way to engage in this discussion, and it's unfortunate that it occurred, but it's occurred with every other aspect of COVID so far. So I guess we couldn't avoid this one either.
And it does seem that US media is portraying vaccine passports in more of a negative light than really maybe focusing on some of the benefits. And well, Dr. Jennings, what do you make of vaccine passports from a public health perspective? I mean, from a public health perspective, wouldn't it make sense to have these vaccination passports or restrictions for those who haven't been vaccinated for the sake of their own health as well as those of others?
Absolutely. I think the issue will be how these are used, how they're implemented, what sort of information is retained on them. And I think this is probably the natural history of a lot of public health interventions. I imagine the same kind of split or discussion came up when seatbelts were introduced, or other things that we now consider just part of normal daily life, as people start to learn that there are benefits for the community as a whole. And the old cliche, we're not all safe until everyone's safe, holds in this, as well as a number of other public health measures that have been very successful over the years.
And well, Professor Hall, right now in America, given the growing sort of skepticism towards COVID-19 vaccine passports, the White House has said that there won't be a national level vaccine passport scheme. So it looks like in the US, it will be up to states and private businesses to develop or adopt vaccine passports. Do you think this is the correct approach? How should the associated ethical and social issues be addressed?
I do think it's not a bad approach. I think a uniform policy would be nice, but I don't think it's realistic at the current time. We often talk about our country as offering a laboratory of the states. In other words, if different states try things different ways, then we learn from that. And it's how we ended up with something like seatbelts. I happen to grew up in the state that had the first seatbelt law, and then quickly others picked that up. And so that I like that example. So I do think if New York goes ahead and has basically adopted the Israeli approach, they call it well, they have a name for it, but and people seem to like it and enjoy it, and they can therefore go to large sporting events and have a grand old time and have big wedding celebrations. And people in other states are feeling like, well, why aren't we having that fun too? You know, then we can learn from that. The other thing is that the virus goes through cycles. So we have upticks or upsurges in spread. We have potential variants. Conditions change, and so something that might not make good sense this week, next week might make great sense. It seems to change that quickly. So I think sort of moving ahead cautiously without any sort of extreme sort of embrace or prohibition seems to be an appropriate response at the moment.
Well, Dr. Jennings, how do you see this? How do you think domestic vaccine passes should work? I mean, with all these privacy concerns and ethical questions, what do you think would be the most secure and coordinated way that societies can ensure that these very sensitive medical data will be handled securely? I mean, do you think it's a good idea to really leave it to the free market, to the invisible hand?
I think that there's a great merit in what Dr. Hall's just said about the advantages of diverse approaches and learning from each other. I think that's served us well throughout this pandemic and will continue to do so in this issue. This is a very complex question, particularly, as you say, about the internal use. And I don't think we have the answers yet, and I think we have to learn from the various jurisdictions around the world that are already trying it and already experiencing some of the benefits and some of the potential real and perceived potential difficulties.
And Professor Hall, just an additional question to you. Then how do you think companies that are developing this kind of technologies, how can they really secure this very sensitive data that will be shared across businesses, jurisdictions even?
Well, I'm not a technology person, but I'm confident it's not a hard problem to solve. I think the issue is to solve it in ways that people have confidence in. But we share an awful lot of, I mean, my son just got vaccinated and he was going to do some travel, and because we didn't have an official way, he just took a screenshot of his online medical record to show people. So, you know, all your medical information is online. Just is it password protected, and do you have control over how it's used? And I think that's a very solvable problem.
Well, hopefully, as you both mentioned, we'll see more solutions to this, a diversity of solutions that we can adopt. And well, this is where we'll have to end the interview today. That was Garry Jennings, Chief Medical Advisor of the Heart Foundation of Australia, and Mark Hall, Professor of Law and Director of Health Law and Policy Programme at the Wake Forest Law School. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.